Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, in history's worst panic, over 16 million shares are dumped on the market. Over $14 billion go with them, and so goes the confidence of a nation.
But around the corners wind the lengthening bread lines, and a whole new class of citizens appears in society, the new poor.
Imagine the Great Depression. People lined up in soup kitchens, hobos in hobo camps, riding the rails. All these images are seared into our history. And look around today. The lineups at soup kitchens, so outrageous back in the 30s, now we see lineup at food banks. Food banks have now become established institutions in this country. We are still told that all those great gains that were made during the Great Depression and afterwards for social safety net, welfare, unemployment insurance, all of those things are still there, but they aren't. Why is it that people can't feel outraged when they see homeless in the streets today and lineups at food bank, yet they can still feel outraged when they look at an old film about the 30s and say, wasn't that awful? Well, look around, it's happening today.
We thought we were done. I mean, hadn't our parents and our grandparents fought long and hard to produce a new society, a more just society? Because after the Great Depression and the horrors of the Second World War, Canadians seem to have come together and said, never again. They wanted to build a society that was capitalist, yes, but with a human face and a helping hand. We introduced universal health care, unemployment insurance, pensions for old people, laws that made it possible for workers to form unions. We wanted to build a society that was good for everybody in the society, not just the barons of Bay Street, good for them too, but for the workers in Winnipeg also. But over the last 20 or 30 years, subtly at first, all that seems to have changed. And all that work that all those generations of Canadians had to do, slowly but surely, seems to have been undone.
Here we are, we're on the construction site. Everybody here is union, as you can see. The rate is about $28, $30 an hour, and they get benefits, they get their pension. And if you go and you look on the other side, there's a non-union builder that has all the laborers, direct laborers working for them, non-union, making between $10 and $15 an hour. Look around, look around. It's the same job. It's the same job, no difference. They're going up with the building, this one is going up as well. These temp agencies go to the employers and say, instead of paying $25, $30 an hour, we can provide you with $12, $13 an hour. Here's the guys, and if they get hurt, well, don't worry about it because we'll get somebody else the next day. It's not like the government doesn't know that this is going on. They all know, they all see it. The problems that people have, do they do anything about it? No.
I started with the LCBO in 1997, and my goal was to obtain full-time work. Now, 12 years later, I am still working as a casual, full-time hours, same work as full-time, but paid as a casual.
The situation here with the LCBO is that they use the standard corporate approach to the workforce, or what's become the standard corporate approach to the workforce. We're now at the point where we have 60% of the workers in the LCBO are casuals, so you can be making $24 an hour with benefits, or you can be making as low as $10 an hour with no benefits and no guarantee of any kind of job security, or not even knowing what your hours will be from week to week. And this is for people who are doing more or less exactly the same job.
They just keep announcing their profits, their billions of dollars, and us at the store level just get told, your hours are cut, your hours are cut.
The employer continually tries to substitute the cheaper workers for the more expensive ones to cut costs.
Several years ago, my daughter had to have a kidney transplant. I had to request time off work, so I was gone for approximately 10 weeks with no income. Then last May, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and had to have time off. And again, no pay. You have to go to work whether you're feeling ill or not because you've got payments to do, obligations, and I mean, oh wow. To make ends meet, I had to do it. I had to take my chemo treatments, all my doctor's appointments. I worked everything into my lunch hours, my days off. One of the things that's kept me going is my daughter. She's been here for me through all of this. I found out that I had breast cancer on the day of her 16th birthday, and that was hard, but we made it. My sisters, my mom, we were all there. We did it all together. A good chicken recipe. Her and I have been through a lot, right from the time of her kidney transplant, her doctor's appointments. My parents helped me out a great deal with bills, but someday I'll be able to be there for them as well, I hope.
It's become common practice in Canada for some companies to skirt the law when it comes to paying their workers a decent living wage. And it's not just the big companies that do it. Sometimes even local grocery stores take advantage.
I'm a single mother of 2 children, my daughter Emma, who's 9, and my son Devin, who's 10. I worked for 13 years at a local grocery store where they kept my hours below the 40-hour full-time mark, so I wasn't eligible for benefits or the full-time rate. After the children's father and I separated, I could not support the 3 of us on $11.10 an hour, and that's where I was sitting after 13 years of service. At the age of 30, I had to move back home with my parents and my 2 children until I could work enough so I could afford to raise first and last month's rent. My situation now is that I'm desperately trying to find work. I've put out 40 to 50 resumes. It wrecks you emotionally and physically because all you do is cry if you think about it, what the horrible position that you're in.
Got some over there, Devin?
Every single day that I'm out of work, I'm sinking deeper and deeper into debt. Strictly living on unemployment, it just isn't covering it. I don't know of one person that can survive on unemployment.
My name's Fa. I used to work here. That's Progressive Molded Products. June 26, they sent us to go on holiday. July 1st, they typed a letter saying the company is closed. July 4, we come here, all the truck is moving out. All of us, 2,400, just lost our job.
You put your whole life down there for 35 years, for 26 years, and no warning, no sign, no notice, nothing.
When we went on picket line, tried to ask for answer, what happened to the company? What happened to the workers? The company, instead of answering us, the company went to the judge house in the middle of Saturday night, not the courthouse, the judge house, and signed that injunction, state that the worker has no right to be there to protest.
At least we're a human being. We've been with you for all these years. At least have mercy. Say something to us. Let us sit down, explain it to us. We're human beings, we understand.
Are we taxpayers paying the tax for the government to serve and protect those millionaires, those big corporations, or to serve the community?
There you are. You've worked 30 or 40 years for the same employer at the lowest kind of wages. And then one day you walk into work and it's all over. The place is chained up. The government looks the other way, says the workers and the employer should work it out. But hey, there is no employer. He's skipped town. But don't worry, because if you hit rock bottom in this country, you can always depend on welfare, right?
We're not on welfare, no. I absolutely refuse to go back for the simple fact that the first time we went in, I got in an argument with the woman running our file because she didn't believe we needed welfare. We were there with all 4 of these, and she treated us like we were dirt. She gave us attitude. She asked him why he couldn't find a job, what was wrong with him, why I wasn't in school.
You have to understand that when you first go to the welfare department, one of the very first questions they're going to ask you is, what assets do you have? So if you say, oh, I have $5,000 in the bank, they'll say, spend it and come back. If you have a car worth more than I forget what, but of any value, they say sell that. If you have RRSPs, you're expected to spend your RRSPs before they'll give you 10 cents. Now, and the way I see it, this is setting these people up for permanent poverty.
I just think the welfare system, the way we've constructed it, deliberately degrades people. It makes their lives miserable and harsh. We've managed as a society to turn these people into pariahs, so that social assistance is a dirty word. Previous governments have done such a good job of demonizing people whose crime is hardship.
They told him he had to do 20 different things in order to even get on welfare. It took us 2 weeks to even do everything she wanted. So I said, you know what, this time I'd rather just suffer. I'd rather starve, make sure they eat, than beg them for money again. And besides, when we get on welfare, they barely give you enough. They take half your child tax check away. And then when you do get a job, they take half your money away, so you can barely ever get off of welfare.
When people are forced to rely on social services, welfare for example, they're facing a system which has been eroded and eroded over the last decade or so that it's simply not adequate to meet the needs of these people. The welfare workers are trapped. I believe that they have a real desire to help the people that they're working with, but they have gigantic caseloads and a mind frame in the organization that says, let's keep our costs down no matter how we do it, we have to keep our costs down.
Low-paid workers are left with no choice but to collect welfare, and they rarely get a break. Leilani Farah is a lawyer who heads the Centre for Equality Rights in Accommodation. She says that women in low-paying jobs are especially hard hit.
You take a low-income earner, single mom, 3 kids, and she misses a couple of shifts because her childcare arrangement falls apart for whatever reason. She gets fired. She can't go on unemployment insurance because she was fired, so she goes to welfare. Her welfare entitlement is so low, she can't pay her rent. The landlord decides to evict her. The only option for her is to go to emergency shelter. She goes to the shelter. The conditions are awful. She starts looking for an apartment. She finds one. It's awful. Bed bugs, rodents, etc. And she's already been in the system, right? She's been in that shelter. Child welfare authorities have sort of kept track of her, and they find out she's in this lousy apartment. So what do? They take her kids.
As a country, we often stand up at the UN to brag that we are great leaders in human rights, rights around poverty, food, housing, and employment. Unfortunately, the UN doesn't see it that way.
The UN has said very clearly to the Government of Canada repeatedly, no, you're not doing all right. You're one of the richest countries in the world. You've got a poverty problem. You've got a homelessness problem. You've got a hunger problem. What does Canada do in response? There's a whole list of recommendations. The UN says do A, B, C, D. What does Canada do? Nothing. Nothing.
Sometimes I'm in a good mood and I'm normal, and other times I'm sad and I'm blue, where literally I turn the ringers off because I don't want to talk to anybody. So I just hide away.
I made this card for my mom because I saw her crying and I wanted her to feel better. It says, hope you'll feel better, Mom. And then there's a picture of Mom, me, and Devin. And then inside it says, Dear Mom, I hope you feel better. As you read this, I know you had a rough time this month. Even though you cry, I still love you and keep you in my heart, hopes and in all my dreams. I love you. And then over here it says, I love you, and then it says, love Emma.
It's not fair. It's not right. The gap's got to be closed somewhere, and somewhere soon.
Sometimes we just feel so hopeless and so helpless. Here we are, surrounded by the riches of the world, and yet there just never seems to be enough. Never enough for the people who need it the most. How did it get to be that way?
I don't think ordinary Canadians understand just how powerful the business community and its lobby, its political organizations are in this country, and always have been since the beginning of this country. I mean, let's face it, back in the 19th century, when the father of Confederation, John A. Mcdonald, was running the country, the Canadian Manufacturers Association, who needed a tariff wall to protect it from competition, used to come to him with a list of tariffs. Here's the tariffs we want for tractors, cars, whatever. And then he would take it to the civil servants, who would turn it into a bill that he would then take into Parliament and pass. In the 80s, we had another example of this kind of incredibly close and almost domineering relationship when Tom DeKino, the leading advocate of the Canadian business lobby in the 80s, went to Mulroney and to the premiers with the support of all the major corporations of Canada and said, here's what we want. We want free trade. We want deregulation. We want privatization, cutbacks in social spending. We need to lower taxes, fewer social programs. And that's what they've been doing ever since. If people were aware of it, it would be the first step to changing it, because it's just simply appalling when you actually realize that the business community, who are unelected, run this country.
Of course, a lot of Canadians suspect that something like this is going on and has been going on for a long time. That the reach of big business is far deeper than we know. So deep that it affects every part of our lives. Jamie Brownlee is the author of Ruling Canada, a study of how large corporations run this country. His book follows the rise of business lobby groups. The most powerful, the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, has a direct line to the Prime Minister's office.
The Canadian Council of Chief Executives is an organization composed of the CEOs of Canada's top 150 corporations. Tom DeKino, the head of the council, in fact boasts often that no other organization in the world at the CEO level has taken such an active interest in lobbying, in politics, and influencing the public. Some have even compared the council to a parallel government or a second government in Canada, with Tom DeKino right at the top as de facto Prime Minister. And if it wasn't for the agenda, the concrete political agendas put forth by these groups, the country would be a very different place. We would not have the level of inequality we have today.
The Canadian Council of Chief Executives, not exactly a household name, is it? And neither is Tom DeKino, the name of their outgoing president. Oh, they're well known to the rich and the powerful and the government, but not so much to the rest of us. Now, some members of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, or CCCE as they're known, are household names. Names like Home Depot, Tim Hortons, Canadian Tire, all the big banks, the radio and TV stations, and boy, they have a lot of clout. Some of them are able to avoid paying taxes altogether.
When we're talking about Canada, people from Revenue Canada will tell you that Canadian multinational corporations avoid paying tax on billions of dollars, that they in effect shift out of the country to other companies that they're related to that might be situated in the tax haven or some other way. Tax havens give rise to two types of problems. One problem is that they in effect allow corporations to set up dummy companies in the tax haven. For example, in the Cayman Islands, there's one building in which apparently there's 97,000 registered companies, all of them shell companies for multinationals around the world, and they siphon all of their profits into there. To be very sort of simplistic about it, if they're importing something from Germany into Canada, what they'll do is they'll take it through that Cayman Islands subsidiary and then leave the profits there. And the other problem caused by tax havens is, of course, the secrecy problem, that it enables rich people to put their money in bank accounts in tax havens, and the tax department can't find out about it. So it's just a huge problem of just straightforward tax evasion.
And it doesn't stop there. As great as tax havens are for the rich, back home we have something even better. Murray Dobbin is an author and journalist based in Vancouver.
I don't think that people really fully recognize how critical the tax cuts that we've experienced in Canada over the last 10 years are. Paul Martin in 2000 introduced tax cuts of $100 billion over 5 years, and 2 years ago Jim Flaherty of the Conservatives introduced tax cuts worth $60 billion over 5 years. The federal government collects $233 billion a year in taxes. Imagine what we could do if we hadn't had those tax cuts. We would be collecting $333 billion a year. That would be enough money to provide a national child care program, a national farmer care program, a national home care program, and you could cut tuition fees at universities by 50% at every university in Canada, and you'd still have $20 billion left over.
But it is like a mystery to people. How is it, since every person has got a vote, that the rich are able to make out like bandits through the tax system? How do they do it, since we all vote, and why aren't we voting to increase taxes on them? And the answer is that the influence of the wealthy on our political process is just pervasive. It influences every aspect of the system. They, in effect, control the public opinion formation process through their control of the media, through their control of think tanks and so on. They control political parties through their donations. Basically, they control virtually every process through which public policies are made in the country. Naturally, you're concerned when you're enacting laws for what effect it might have on your friends and people you socialize with. That politicians tend not to socialize with poor people, and therefore aren't, sensitive to the problems. They're sensitive to the problems that rich people have. Brian Mulroney, who was our Prime Minister, who introduced free trade and the GST and all those measures, when he left politics, went on the board of directors of dozens of boards and made millions of dollars. Well, he could see that was going to happen. I mean, business rewards politicians who take care of them. And so politicians have to worry, what if I lose office in 4 years or 8 years? Then what am I going to do? Well, if you've been a friend of business, they'll take care of you. I mean, we see it over and over again. The ways that business interests and wealthy Canadians control our politics, as I say, is subtle, but enormously effective.
Over the last, say, 10 or so years, the public service has been under constant attack by politicians and the government in general, who are moving to downsize the public service, at least deprofessionalize it. A poignant example is food inspection in this country. Food inspection was once only the purview of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, where inspectors were on the shop floor and looking at the product. Over the last number of years, we've seen reduced number of inspections and giving more of the policing to the industry itself. But this industry is driven by profit, not by public good.
Dr. Shiv Chopra was a senior scientist with Health Canada. He was responsible for food safety. And when he refused to approve harmful drugs intended for use with meat and milk production, well, he had a fight on his hands.
I was given a series of products to look at coming from the companies. Big companies like Monsanto, Eli Lilly, Pfizer, Bayer, these huge companies. And I say, this information is not satisfactory. Go back, produce more. And the companies go back to the minister or the prime minister or the privy council, they say pass it anyway. Because the US has passed it. I can't. And so therefore they say you're fired. People trust the government. The public gets hurt, they think it's something else. It cannot be. They cannot even imagine that the government would be doing it.
It's the government's role to protect the public. When the industry, who is concerned about profit only, gets involved, there's a natural conflict of interest, and I think the public ends up paying in the end.
A good example is free trade. I mean, all governments say, oh, we're committed to free trade, but really they're only committed to free trade for like blue-collar workers. So they have free trade for blue-collar workers, which would mean blue-collar workers in Canada has to compete against blue-collar workers in Taiwan and everywhere around the world, and yet we don't have free trade for lawyers. If you're a lawyer trained in India, you can't come to Canada and get a lawyer. We don't have free trade for tenured professors. Like, no one can come and take my job. Even though they're probably better educated, might do a better job. They can't come and take my job. Same with doctors, all professionals. I mean, the only people we have free trade for are, in effect, basically lower income workers or middle and low income workers. And so that it's just another way that sort of wealthy people in effect control their privileged position in our society.
The free trade agreement was like a declaration in a sense. It gave the large corporations the right, entrenched in a legal agreement, to just kind of go wild, move wherever they wanted and could on the North American continent, go to jurisdictions where wages were low, where protections for unions were low. The large corporations had this new freedom. There was a real power shift that happened. You had a lot of people who were unemployed. You had people shifting from better paid manufacturing jobs into lower paid service jobs. These jobs were temporary, a lot of self-employment, part-time in many cases, what we call precarious work, no benefits, no job security, no protection.
One of the things that we know is that as a society becomes more unequal, then people participate less and less in politics because they feel impotent. I mean, they see this enormous wealth and power that rich people have, and they think, well, I can't make any difference, and so they withdraw from politics. A real cost of inequality is that it has this sort of corrosive effect on the political system by causing people to sort of withdraw from politics, and consequently the rich become even more powerful.
There's just this relentless transfer of some of the benefits from the social wage back onto the backs of ordinary people, and a withdrawal of all those support systems that guaranteed a sense of security and survival with dignity. And that's where we're at today. We have really returned to the past.
Well, it's obvious that this huge corporate power surge we've been seeing over the last few years hasn't been very good for the most of us. It's been really great for business, though. Just listen to this. 20 years after free trade came in, 24 of Canada's biggest corporations had become richer by $93 billion and laid off 200,000 of their workers at the same time as the income gap in Canada was widening faster than you could say globalized free markets. That's what's happening in Canada. But is it like that everywhere?
I've not been on vacation for 14 years. I've never been to Europe. I find this is going to be very exciting. I am looking forward to this trip to see how things are done in other countries.
It's got to be a better way of doing it here. I want to see how it's done there so we can do the same thing here.
Here we are in Ireland, a country of less than 5 million people, famous for its leprechauns, its pots of gold, and its extraordinary writers. And tragically, until not that long ago, its extraordinary poverty. And then something happened. Ireland joined the European Union. It cut its corporate taxes and it opened its doors for business. Oh, it became the darling of the new global economy, the Celtic Tiger. Ireland's economy was one of the richest in the whole world. But did it work for everyone?
My dad worked here before me for 36 years. And he got me in here for the summer holidays when I was 15. And I spent the last 42 and a half years. My sister worked here for 8 years as well, and my daughter then worked here as well for 4 years. At our height, we employed 3,600 people. There's nobody in Ireland ever expected Waterford Crystal to go into receivership.
We all went on holidays in December. We came back on the 5th of January to hear on the news that morning that our company was gone into receivership. So what happens when a company goes into receivership is that Waterford Crystal, as you know it, no longer exists.
Right.
That the actual management that you've been dealing with and negotiating with are gone.
The crowd that have bought Waterford Crystal are KPS Capital. They're a company that they specialise in buying up bankrupt companies. They get them up and running again for a year or so and make a big profit and then sell them on, and that's what they specialise
So
in.
they have no interest in crystal at all?
They have no interest in manufacturing here, full stop. They haven't even any interest in the gallery. They bought it, but they want to lease it out, and that just shows how much interest they have in it.
And you guys sat in, you took over the visitor centre, you took over the whole operation for a while?
We all congregated outside the gallery. That was totally locked up as well, and the receiver had his own security personnel inside. At one stage, luckily for us, they had to open the door to allow somebody in. And when they did, we actually rushed the building, and we've occupied it for over 7 weeks now, up to yesterday.
Workers and former employees of Waterford Crystal entered the main visitor centre at Kilbarry after word had got out that the place was to close. There were some scuffles with security staff hired by the receiver. Some of the current 480 employees and former employees say they were very disappointed at how they've been treated.
It's actually sad. Nobody working, all the lines closed down and glass just lying there.
This is an occupation, and we have no intention of leaving here until this process is back on the track.
The sit-in is expected to continue until there are major developments with possible investors in the company.
I feel like crying now just talking about it. That's how bad I feel. I'm absolutely devastated. I'm 57, nearly 58. I have 7 years to go, still to my pension.
So you still have to work for the next 7 years?
I still have to try and get something in me to keep me surviving, yeah. Not too many people going to employ me now at this stage, you know. Christmas pieces, the 12 days of Christmas.
Oh!
The 12 days of... Quality is absolutely fantastic, absolutely pristine condition. I take so much pride in that. Everything has to be A1 before we actually put it out on the market. And that's what makes Waterford Crystal so good. My ultimate dream would be to see Waterford Crystal reopening, and I have 3 grandchildren, and I'd love to see 1 or 2 of them maybe work on Waterford Crystal as well. That would be my dream, yeah.
The Waterford Crystal workers occupied the plant for 7 weeks, and they managed to save jobs for a few more months, and they were given a one-time cash payout. But their dream of a secure income and of decent retirement pay was gone. In the meantime, hundreds of men and women who worked there are looking for a new job. And in today's Ireland, they're more likely to find that job in a shop, which really is too bad for them, because men and women who work in stores, hotels and restaurants make some of the lowest wages in Ireland.
Well, retail workers in Ireland at the moment are going through an extremely difficult period of time. They're basically just struggling to survive on the wage levels they're on at the moment, which is just basically above the national minimum wage. Their hours are being slashed by multinational employers. There's also a large degree of underemployment, because the trade has been actually casualised in Ireland, where 70% of all workers in the retail trade are part-time workers.
I work for Tesco, which is a large supermarket chain. The majority of workers in Tesco's are part-time employees. So if a person is working, say, a 20 to 25 hour band, where before Christmas when it was busy you'd be getting 25 hours or more, now they just get the bare 20 hours and no more. And everybody is working at the bottom.
45% of those citizens who are at risk of poverty are from households where at least one person works. A job in itself is no longer a route out of poverty.
It's hard, you know, when you're just the main wage earner in a family to survive on that when the price of things seem to be getting higher and your wages are at a standstill.
In Ireland at the moment, 1% of the population own 30% of all the nation's wealth. And ironically, some of the major retailers are the owners of that wealth, and they pay their workers just slightly above the poverty line.
The minimum wage in Ireland now stands at $14.25 an hour, but there is continuous pressure from employers to reduce this. Employers also want to get rid of sick benefits and pensions, in fact to dismantle the very safety net that took so many years to build.
In the decades past, when wealth was being created, our members didn't share that wealth. What's going to happen in the next 5 or 6 years when no wealth or little or no wealth is being created? Will our members be expected to take the pain? Now that's something we cannot stand for, and that's something which has to change, and that's something which workers are going to have to mobilise for to fight against.
much of the wealth accumulated over the past 20 years was not distributed to all citizens equally. Most of the wealth went to the few, leaving low-wage workers living barely above the poverty line. So far, the Conservative government in Ireland has been very pro-business, reducing corporate taxes and easing up on all regulations. The roller coaster up and downs of Ireland's economy are enough to make your head spin. Poor as church mice one time, and then, within 2 decades, rich as Rockefellers, and then down and out again. But one bright spot continues to be that the Irish still have free access to a university education.
I'm 27 and I come from a socially deprived area, and no one in my family has ever been to university. No one in where I live has ever been to university before me. So it was outside of my social sphere. It was outside of what we call my mind map. The only thing that saved me in relation to my future was that education wasn't going to cost a lot of money, and if I wanted to go, I could go.
How important has free education been to Ireland?
Education and access to education and the ability of everyone, regardless of where you come from, to go to education has been the very, very centre of Ireland's economic explosion. We had this whole notion of a Celtic Tiger, and the Celtic Tiger really began in 1998 right through to 2005, and that was predicated on a young, highly educated, highly skilled workforce. I suppose from my own point of view, what education has done has certainly taken me out of the poverty trap in relation to the type of jobs I'm going to have in the future. And that's what education should be. It should be about helping people to progress socially and economically and in every other sphere.
The Irish still want to do something concrete about poverty, and they've done more than just talk. The unions are strong, and there are people standing up and fighting for the most helpless.
I think there is an opportune moment now at the moment to discuss the values of society. Workers are going to have to come together and going to have to make a stand and say, listen, no, it's no longer acceptable, right, that you make 2 billion profits and I earn $10 an hour or less, right? It's no longer acceptable that my working week last week was 40 hours and this week is 20 hours. In order to even up that equation, I think workers have to organise. And unions have to be part of that mobilisation, have to facilitate that mobilisation as much as possible. And whether that takes, we can do it in government buildings or we do it on the streets. Ultimately, we're going to try and do it anyway.
Sweden still has one of the most productive economies in the entire world. Sweden is #1 in providing opportunities for women, in ensuring first-class child care and education for younger children. And one of the reasons that people say that Sweden enjoys this advantage is because years ago they came up with what is now referred to as the Swedish Model. It's a social partnership where everyone is invited to the table to make decisions. Labor is there, business is there, and government is there, equally making decisions about what will be best to serve Swedish society. And if you talk to the average Swede, that seems to be working.
We have a security system here, so we don't have to worry so much, and I think that is very good.
Okay, here we are at Mcdonald's in downtown Stockholm. Oh yeah, you can go in there, you can get yourself a Big Mac or a Egg McMuffin or whatever you like, just like home. The difference is that in there, the McDonald's workers are unionized. Even the McDonald's management is unionized. In Sweden, there's a whole different feeling about unions. Over 70% of Swedish workers are unionized.
Are you a member of the union?
Yes, I'm about 3 years. This is good for me. Maybe some problem working, so I must be talk with union. They are talking with McDonald's when I have some problem with boss.
Well, here we are, a liquor store, and it's run by government just like back home. It even looks much the same as the one Vicki works in back in Stratford, Ontario. And they even have casual and full-time workers over here, just like we do in Canada.
I've been with the LCBO, as we call it, for 12 years, and I'm still a casual. Our concern in Ontario is that casuals have no benefits. no sick days, no vacation days. If I were to go home sick today and not be back for 2 weeks, I would have no income.
Okay. That would never be accepted here. Never. If you get sick, the first day you get nothing from nowhere. But from day 2 and the first 2 weeks, the company and the state together pays for your part of your salary, which is about 80%. Then after 2 weeks, the state takes over, and that doesn't matter if you have 8 hours or 40 hours or whatever, full-time or part-time employment. It's the same for everyone.
The government does not step in at all in our situation. Ours, the employer, the LCBO, has the monopoly, and they tell us what we can work, what we're going to get paid. Now we are fighting that as a union.
If you look at the company will probably thrive, and it will be a better employer if you actually have some kind of security among the personnel working there.
In the meantime, Durval has made a side trip to a Stockholm suburb which is the home of Scania, one of the largest truck makers in the world. Across the globe, Scania employs over 35,000 workers. By now, of course, we're getting used to the idea that everyone is unionized. The surprise is that in Sweden, this makes everyone happy, including the employer.
In Scania, we have 2 members of the union in the board of directors of the company, and we think that's a good system. It's mandatory, by the way. It's a law.
How does the company feel about that? Do they feel intimidated?
I think Scania, as other companies, they appreciate to have the union in the board. We have in many aspects, I mean all aspects, I would say, the same interest to create work, to make the company profitable, make the owner happy. There's no conflict between good job, good profit.
My name is Johan Järvklo. I am the president for the Blue Collar Union here at Scania in Södertälje and a member of the board of directors at Scania. My role is to represent the employees.
How many employees do you have working here?
4,000.
4,000. Yeah. How many of them are union?
85%.
How hard is being now this economy on your membership? Are you losing membership?
No, actually I'm gaining membership because when times are tough, you want our help. So people have who left the union for 10 years ago, now they come back. I reconsidered. Here's my application. The relation between the company and the union is quite good. It's very important for the company as well as the workers, of course, to come to an agreement. Because that's the only way actually to make things work here. We don't have legislations about minimum wage or something. It's all agreed in collective agreements.
För vi har ju utvecklingstal I alla fall på andra avdelningar.
Swedish workforce have been on strikes after strikes and this is history. And now we don't have to anymore. They know we have the power. They know we have the ability to mobilize the people. And of course, they have the need to get the work done. So just knowing. It's a little bit about, if you think of the Cold War, so to speak. Everyone knew there were nukes around. No one wanted, you didn't have to use them. You knew.
What other benefits are there by being on the board of directors?
I get to vote. I mean, and that I think is the most important issue.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Very interesting.
But you don't have this, huh?
No, we don't have that. I would love to have that.
The workers know that since the union is strong, the company, they can't say one thing and then do something else. Information goes downwards, so it pours out to us here on the floor as well. In Sweden, our system takes care of all the people. You can get sick, and you can hurt yourself at work. You can lose your income for a couple of months, and the system will take care of you. And that's why it feels okay to pay a lot of taxes. I love taxes. I love to pay taxes. I love taxes.
Can you tell me how the Swedes managed to be so progressive?
I think that the most important issues in this model is that everybody pays high taxes. So we have a high level of general welfare. Everybody gets free childcare. Everybody gets free health care on a high level. Everybody gets free elderly care. Everybody who's got a child will have 100 euros a month, every month. Everybody will have that for each child, for example. So it's not only for the poor ones, it's for everyone. And a lot of things in the Swedish welfare model is for everyone. And that's why it's okay for everyone to pay to it.
Sweden is #1 in the world when it comes to providing quality childcare. It begins right when the child is born. Sweden provides 16 months paid parental leave following the birth of your child, top quality preschool at a nominal fee, with a guaranteed place for every child in Sweden.
I'm not the monkey bars!
And on top of that, 10 days of mandatory paid parental leave every year so you can spend time with the family.
In Sweden, everyone can afford daycare, rich or poor. Doesn't matter.
That's the fascinating thing to me, that the Swedish people, not only do they have the Swedish model, but that you've been able to keep going in the face of this relentless push towards everybody grab, I got mine, Jack, you get yours. How has Sweden managed to hold forth, like stand up against that?
Strong labour movements, strong unions, and strong social democratic governments with a big agreement with not only with the unions but also with employers on how to boost economic growth and welfare and justice in society.
Social partnerships, union leaders on the board of directors of companies, part-time workers with full-time benefits. Wow. Just being in this environment made me want to be involved in that system somehow. You know, make my own contribution. So, Vicki and I found in our own North American way the quickest way to do that.
Oh, that's right, because of course in this society you're not allowed to have a real cake. You have to be real. I had a kind of more dark childhood. I have a more bright IKEA childhood. Yeah, right. I ate all the chocolate bars in my bar.
We are in IKEA, world's largest IKEA. It's approximately 55,000 square meters, and we have about 1,000 employees. I started in IKEA in '99. So about 10 years ago, and I started as a sales person, full-time at the start, and I still have full-time.
What is your home life like here in Sweden?
My girlfriend is right now home with our son Marcus, who's 4 months old, and she will be stay home for at least 1 more year, and then she'll go back to her work, and I get to stay home with Marcus because we have in Sweden a pretty good parental leave.
How many days parental leave do you get?
We get, in Sweden, we get 480 days per child.
And can that be split up between spouses?
We can split the days between us however we like.
Free childcare, free healthcare. Where does that put the working poor in Sweden?
We don't really have working poor in Sweden. People who work can make their living, and they can afford things by their salaries, because we have quite high levels on the lowest salary, and that's according to this collective agreements that's on the whole Swedish labor market. So poor people are people without jobs, and poor people are people coming from other countries and have not all yet been able to get a job in Sweden.
That country seems so strong. They've got the best childcare in the entire world, free post-secondary education, strong unions, and best of all, a solid and workable partnership between labor, government, and business. And that's what makes the whole thing work. And you know what? We could do that. I mean, maybe all we have to do is remember our history.
The only way to bring about change, massive social change, is when people are angry and people are aware of the injustice and are prepared to act on it. You don't have wealth. You're not rich. You can't close down a community because you're wealthy and own the factory in it. The only thing you have is your vote. If we mobilize together, that is when we have power. That's the only time we have power. Every democratic gain that we have ever made has been made by us common people organizing and taking it from the powerful. They've never given it to us freely and openly.
We want our politicians to believe us when we tell them things have to change.
We know that changes can be made, that all the money doesn't need to flow to the top, that some of the money can flow down to us at the bottom who hold the whole thing up.
If you look at this building, when they got in power for 3-4 terms, after they leave, they got their pension, right? What can it be the same for us?
We don't have a part-time Canada, it's full-time. We don't have a part-time Ontario, they're full-time. We need full-time workers, not part-time.
I'm seeing more and more workers in one of the wealthiest countries in the world walking in the doors of a food bank. This has got to stop. This must change. This must change. This must change. This must change. This must change.
We will make poverty history if we work toward it. All we need is the will.
Poor no more. Poor no more. Poor no more. Poor no more. Poor no more.